Good evening and welcome to A Slice of Life. I'm your host, Jim Therian. Tonight's topic of discussion is something called the Xerces Society. Now, if you've never heard of that, you're not alone. We have a speaking guest here tonight with us. Her name is Nancy Tipping. She is the ambassador for the Xerces Society here in Connecticut, and we're here to welcome her. Ambassador Tipping, welcome to A Slice of Life.
Thank you, Jim.
Please tell us about the Xerces Society.
Okay, so the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, that's a big mouthful, and when I start talking about it, people look at me like, Xerces, that's a funny word,
Yeah.
What's that about?
You lost me on the funny word.
Yeah, and what are we trying to conserve with invertebrates? Right. So I start out by telling them that the Xerces blue butterfly is the first butterfly we know of that has gone extinct from human impact. So it was surviving here in our country, and then people started moving into its environment and bulldozing roads and driveways and houses until their habitat got so fragmented and small that they just couldn't maintain their population. Right. The last one was seen flying in 1943, and in 1971 it was declared extinct. And at that time, there was a group of people who felt that there should be an organization that protected invertebrates like butterflies. And they formed that organization and decided to call it Xerces. Oh. So that's where the word came from. And as far as it's the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, invertebrates, they're like, some examples would be bees, butterflies, moths, fireflies, dragonflies, freshwater mussels, spiders, crabs.
I must tell you, I was surprised by the freshwater mussel inclusion. I was very surprised by that. But I guess it is an invertebrate.
Yes, it is, and it has a fantastic function in the environment. It filters water and purifies water in our streams and lakes. Yeah.
Excellent.
So Xerces is an international nonprofit, and basically they have two things that they do. They want to preserve habitat for invertebrates, and they want to reduce the impact and the use of pesticides. So those are the two things that...
Well, on several occasions throughout the history of this show, the subject of pesticides has come up again and again and again. Yeah. And there really is a lot of poison out there.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about pesticides, and maybe this is a good time to. But Xerces does a lot of research. They are a science-based organization, and so I was able to find out some things that I didn't know about pesticides. For example, when a pesticide company wants to find out how toxic their pesticide is, they take a beehive, a honeybee hive, or a couple, and they expose the bees to their pesticide. And how fast 50% of the bees die is how toxic the pesticide is.
Wow.
So that's what they do, but here's what Xerces does. Xerces wants to know what happened to the other 50% of the bees that survived. Yeah. And they studied them. And here's what happens to them.
How healthy are those?
Basically two things. Yeah. One, they lose their ability to navigate back to the hive. Now, for a honeybee out in the world foraging, that's not so big a deal. Maybe the honeybee will die, but the hive will survive. Right. But for our native bees, which are solitary nesters, where there's a queen who's laying eggs in a nest, if she can't figure out how to get back to her nest to lay eggs, then whatever eggs are in the nest will be the next generation, or if there's no eggs in the nest yet, there won't be a next generation for that female bee. Right. So pesticides are a big problem, and some people say, well, it's a natural pesticide, you know, it's made from chrysanthemums or something like that. Yeah. But do you know that cyanide comes from plants.
Right.
Nicotine comes from plants. Cardiac glycosides come from plants. They make these compounds to kill bugs so they don't eat them because the plant's trying to survive. So
right.
That's not a really good rationale
right.
to use a
right.
pesticide.
But it seems like a good idea.
It does. Yeah. It does. But instead, Xerces and many other organizations are in favor of getting a balance of predators.
Oh.
So if you have plants that are good for predators, you will get things like ladybugs and like wasps and
right.
like spiders, and they will prey on the pests that, you know, damage our crops and things like that.
Right, right.
So
let's
yeah.
You brought some slides with us today.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those.
Okay. Whoops.
Here's
Okay.
the first one.
Yeah. What I do with this slide is I ask people to picture a bee, you know, in their head. What color is it? What size is it? And most people will picture a honeybee. And then I show this slide, and this is a little cuckoo bee, one of our native bees here in Connecticut,
oh.
and is 5 millimeters long.
Yeah.
And it flies around from April to June. So when I look at this slide, I think of two things. One, if we don't have flowers that are in bloom between April, May, and June, we're not going to support this bee.
Right.
And number two, where is it in the summer and the fall and the winter?
Well, that's a very good point.
And that's one of the things that Xerces has helped me think about.
Yeah.
And where it is, you know, it's an egg laying on some pollen, then it hatches and the larva eats the pollen and it develops through a number of instars, and then it comes out 9 months later, back in April again,
oh, wow.
as a bee.
So the eggs are laid on the pollen?
Yeah. They are. And so it's made me think, like, you know, when I'm out walking in the winter, I look in the woods and I think, I wonder what bees are under all that leaf litter and
right, right.
all of that, because, you know, only a few insects will migrate. Everything else stays here.
Right.
It has to survive the winter, and sometimes they survive as eggs, sometimes larvae, sometimes adults, sometimes in a cocoon or
right.
something like that. But anyway, so can we show the next slide?
Of course we can.
Yeah. Okay, so
oh, look at that one.
Most people do not think of a green bee when they think of a bee. And this is a green sweat bee. And I would like to ask you a true-false question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
This bee is called a sweat bee because it lands on you and drinks your sweat. True or false?
I would say true.
It is.
Oh, really?
It is true, yeah.
Oh, I thought you were setting me up, but the real answer was false.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
It is true. You know,
this is right?
one of our native bees. Can we look at the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a long-tongued bumblebee.
Yeah.
I never thought about bumblebees having long tongues
right,
or short tongues. We have 16 different species of bumblebees in Connecticut, by the way.
Wow.
But this bee was just inside this flower, and the flower is very deep, so it needed to have its long tongue. And you can see the nectar is still hanging on to the end of the tongue.
Oh, that's the tongue sticking out?
Yep, that
Whoa.
is the tongue sticking out of the bee.
It looks like just a filament.
Yeah, I know.
So as I was speaking to you before the show, I tried to get a lot of pictures of bees in my garden and stuff, and I found it very difficult to get a photo of this quality.
Yeah.
The bees aren't really doing a lot of posing for me and my camera.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that is a beautiful photo.
Yep. And this number is the number of native bee species that we have here in Connecticut.
Wow.
This is just Connecticut. In New England, there are 400 different species.
Wow.
In the United States, 3,600 different species. So 340 different species of native bees. You kind of
think there's like 3 kinds of bees: bumblebees, honeybees, and
I know.
And maybe a wasp or something.
I know. But Xerces has done.
Huge number.
Yeah, Xerces has done a lot of research, and it's really great that they can get this research out to people. So I can talk a little bit about the goal of Xerces.
Yes,
if
let's
you
do
want.
that.
Okay. So
let's hold this picture up, Anne-Marie, and let's talk about what you're going to say.
Okay. So their tagline is protecting the life that sustains us.
Right.
And so then the next thing that people think of is, well, how do invertebrates sustain life? No.
Right.
So there's a few things that invertebrates do that are crucial to sustaining life. One is pollination, not just for our food, but for the food of all of the birds and animals that we share the earth with. And the other one we talked a little bit about earlier, they clean the streams, our waters.
Right, right.
Yeah. Have you ever had a tank of fish?
I would say no.
Okay. Well, if you have a tank of fish, you've got to clean that tank every 2 weeks or so.
Right.
Because the fish defecate in the water, the food gets in the water gets cloudy, it's just, you know, it gets dirty.
Yeah.
But 200 years ago, when there was tons of fish in our lakes and streams, and animals washing their food in the water and swimming in the water, there was a crystal clear water.
Right.
Why? Because freshwater mussels were on the bottom of a lake and in beds in streams, and all they're doing all day long is they're filtering water, they're taking out impurities in the water, and they're getting the oxygen from the water, and then they're putting out the clean water. And that's all they're doing. And they're doing it right now in streams around us and lakes around us, but do we ever think of them?
Never.
No, Xerces does though.
Yeah.
But you know, before I knew about Xerces, I never did either.
Right, right.
I didn't know any of this. So we really need clean water, and it's a fundamental thing for all living things. But you know, they're not pretty, they're not colorful like the monarch butterfly, they're not fluffy and cute.
Yeah.
So we never think about them. So Xerces just makes me think about things that I would not have thought of.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say there's a lot of that.
Yeah. There's another thing that invertebrates do to sustain us is dispose of waste. Like if you think about all of the animals that defecate in the woods and all of the woody debris that comes down off trees, it's beetles that get rid of that, and they recycle those nutrients back in the soil to feed, you know, the rest of the plants. They control crop pests, like I said before, like wasps and ladybugs and spiders.
Ladybugs eat aphids, I heard that.
Yep, they control crop pests. They disperse seeds. Ants will disperse the seeds of plants. And the other,
I didn't know that.
And the other thing they do is they are a food source for other animals. So there are animals as small as a toad to as big as a walrus that eat invertebrates. Foxes eat invertebrates. Bears eat invertebrates. Walruses too. So
a valuable food source for the fauna.
That's how invertebrates sustain life. Doing all those things. And I could keep talking if you want.
You're here to talk, so let's go.
Okay.
Do you want another slide, or do you want to go off on something else?
Pretty soon.
Okay.
Okay, so the things that Xerces does, it supports science. It does research, and it identifies the best practices that people can do to promote the habitats for invertebrates. And it puts research results to work. It publishes scientific papers. And that is good because it gives people who want to do this work the confidence to make a pollinator garden, to do things, you know. They also try to engage legislators to educate them about how policy can impact development, how policy can impact land management. Conservation, farming, and then the third thing that Xerces is involved in is outreach and education. So I have this this plant sheet here.
Oh, let's look at it.
That I wanted to show you. I got this off of the Xerces website. I don't know if you can see it, but a lot of organizations, they'll produce a native plant list and they'll tell you lots of things. But this one is different. So it tells you the botanical name, and it tells you the regular name, and when it blooms, and how much water, and how much sun, and all those regular things. But on the side, in the last column, it lists things like, is it tolerant for deer? You know, is it a host plant? Oh. Is it for specialist bees?
Right.
Will it support bumblebees? Is it for native bees? Is this a plant that a bee will nest inside the stem of and overwinter? Or is this a plant that a bee will collect debris from it to make their nest? So there's an awful lot of information on this one sheet.
You know, I was perusing your website, and again, just a wealth of knowledge in there.
Yep.
And this is for the Northeast, but they have a different, similar schedule for different regions across America.
Yep, all around.
Yeah.
Yep, all around. So could we see the next slide? I believe the next slide is about, Bee City.
Bee City, let's talk about Bee City.
Yeah, so another thing that Xerces has is they will certify a city as being, you know, friendly to bees if they follow, you know, have certain policies.
Right.
So they have to plant native plants, they have to not spray pesticides, etc. And then they can apply for this certification. And it's not only for cities, it's also for campuses.
Oh, wow.
So there are 214 bee cities now in the United States. So that's kind of cool. And we have,
that's very cool.
We have one in Connecticut.
Oh, is that right?
And it was just certified in August of 2023, so not quite a year, but it's New Milford.
Oh, New Milford.
New Milford, yes.
How did they get to that qualification?
Well, you know, I'm not an expert on Bee City. I know they have things, specific things they have to do.
Right.
Certain, you know, native plants and not using pesticides, and probably there's some regulations, local regulations about what new builders can put in. Oh, things like that. I don't know. But anyway, there's the certification, and so then there's Bee Campus, and there's 191 bee campuses in the United States. And in Connecticut, we have 2. Quinnipiac University and UConn.
You know, I think that is an outstanding, outstanding thing to get the campuses involved.
And it doesn't have to be college either.
Right. Well,
it could be any school.
It's good to get the colleges involved because they're full of young and, you know, impressionable people.
Yeah.
That need to know that there's something that they can do to help their planet, so that when they get to be our age, maybe it won't be so bad. Yeah. So another thing that Xerces does is, can we see the next slide? They have a program called X-Kids. Now, X-Kids is, it's a booklet of activities for grades 3 through 5, but I did it with my granddaughter and I learned things. Really?
It is based on the National Science Standards, and what it does is it teaches invertebrates by using them as, presenting them with having superpowers.
Oh, wow.
So the kids will learn about a superpower, and then the invertebrates that have that superpower. So pollination is one that they go over. Predation is another, because we need predators. They talk about predators and prey in the balanced environment. They have self-defense is one of the superpowers, and they talk about how some animals mimic other animals, and some have camouflage.
Just like the monarch butterfly has a mimicker.
It does. The viceroy, yes. Oh, wow. Yep, you're right, exactly. And that they use that example too.
Oh, they do?
Yep.
Oh, very good.
Another power is transformation. This I did not know, but dragonflies start their life as eggs in the water.
Oh, wow.
on a stem, underwater. They have their first instar underwater, and then as they go through their different instars, they get closer to the surface, and the last instar is the dragonfly, which flies away. So,
kind of like the mayfly, I would say.
Yeah, so, you know, so I thought that was cool.
That's very cool.
Then another superpower they talk about is communication. And in that, they talk about bioluminescence, and they talk about fireflies. How they light their lights, and that's how they find their mates.
I am seeing a scant few fireflies in my backyard now.
Yes.
So I don't know if this is their season, but...
It is their season. They need certain things to complete their life cycle, and if they don't have them, they're not going to be around.
It's a dead end.
But... yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah, yeah. But, yeah, so fireflies, and then pheromones, using pheromones like chemicals that smell.
Right.
Like ants will lay down a scent trail. If they find food, they'll lay down a scent trail to communicate with the other ants to find the food. And there are spiders that will secrete pheromones to attract moths or other things that they want to eat.
Sneaky little dope.
Yeah, so they communicate with those things. So, and then the last one they talk about is moonlight navigation.
Oh.
And this is what moths use in order to fly a straight line. They keep the angle of the moon the same angle to their path of flight.
Right, right.
But the problem is when they see a light, they think it's the moon, and that's why they go around the light.
You know, Nancy, I have always wondered that. Why are they circling the street light? Oh, wow.
Yep. So
they're very confused.
Outdoor lights, and they waste their energy too, and then they don't complete their mating and their life cycle, whatever. But outdoor lighting is not that good, and there are some kinds of lights, some colors of lights that are better than others. Like yellow light is better.
Yeah, I think in the past we've had a lights out person on, and she did mention that the different colors.
Yeah.
But they're discovering now that the different colors have different effects.
Yeah.
So that's very positive, I guess.
Yeah.
Making progress on many fronts.
Yeah. And at the end of this, the student does activities, 2 activities. Like my granddaughter, she photographed an insect, put it up on iNaturalist to be identified.
Oh, right.
And that teaches about, you know, citizen science.
Yep.
And we planted a native plant, so you can also, the student can teach a friend about it or teach their parents or something like that. So, and then they earn a badge.
Oh,
and it's a wooden badge, and it's very nice, you know. So,
well, it's nice that, you know, they have something they can bring home to Grandma and, oh, look, Grandma, look what I did. So that's very important.
Yeah, I know.
Do we have another slide?
Yeah, we have another slide.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so Xerces has a YouTube channel, and they do webinars, and they are the most informative webinars you'll ever get.
Oh.
They have the experts who work in the field with whatever it is they're talking about, who really know.
Yep.
So if it's fireflies you want to learn about, or freshwater mussels, or whatever.
Right.
You know.
Oh, well, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, they have the YouTube channel.
And this is this is the address here?
Yeah.
Xerces Society, one word?
YouTube.com, Xerces Society.
All right, very good.
Xerces Society, yeah.
Excellent, very good.
Okay, and then there's one more slide, I think.
All right. Oh, there you go.
So they have a podcast which you can get. It's called Bug Banter, and it's just talking about.
I love that name. That's a great name.
It's talking about bugs, and you see the pictures there, and they talk about all different kinds of bugs. And it's,
wow, Bug Banter.
You know, that's their.
We're gonna have to check that out.
That's their podcast.
All right.
Okay.
What's next?
So I thought I might talk about what makes a pollinator garden.
You know what I'd like to do first?
Sure.
I'd like to see that video that's on your website.
Oh, great.
Anne-Marie, could we call that up?
Scroll down.
Right there.
There it is.
Let's watch that.
Protecting the life that sustains us.
This is excellent about what the Xerces Society does.
Yep.
The The Xerces Society is the largest invertebrate conservation organization in the world.
I attended a lecture in London about the conservation of the large blue butterfly that was becoming extinct under their noses in spite of the fact that they were doing everything they could to conserve it. I had the thought, well, we've already lost a blue butterfly, the Xerces blue. Wow, that could be our symbol.
Without invertebrates, which are really the base of the food chain, our whole world would collapse. They help clean our rivers. They help make our soils healthy. We work with researchers across the world to understand the animals and the habitats that we're trying to protect. So we're using this science to drive outreach and education, to drive on-the-ground conservation, and to drive policies that will help these animals, but also ultimately help us.
When I think about the Xerces Society, I think about scientists who care. They have a presence all across the country, and every single staff member is enthusiastic about the work they do. And that's what I love about Xerces. They're passionate and so willing to share with anybody who wants to help.
That's really the heart of what I love about my job, is that I think we're actually doing something to benefit people, to benefit insects, to benefit our natural environment.
People wonder, are we really losing all the insects? Really losing the food for the trout? Losing our pollinators? It's all too easy to get depressed by that and give up. And the fact is, it's not everywhere. And it's not all insects. And it's not too late.
There's a greater understanding that time is short and we have to be making some big changes around how we live and interact with the environment.
We are really a pivotal time for both our organization as well as, I think, for the planet. It's about everyone taking steps to protect these animals, because that's what's going to make the change we need. The neat thing about insect and invertebrate conservation is it does not have to be done on a large scale. Anybody can do this by just thinking about a few simple steps. Plant flowers in your yard, and you'll likely see bees and butterflies.
No matter where you are, you can get involved, whether it's monarchs, dragonflies, or freshwater mussels. We have tons of free resources to help you protect these animals.
Xerces offers programming that isn't restricted by age or by knowledge, and that in and of itself is a beautiful thing. Xerces really is a place where people of all walks of life and ages can come together.
We're really trying to energize a lot of different groups of people to be part of the solution, both in our urban spaces and our agricultural areas. If we do a good job, we can get everybody involved.
All of us have the potential to help. This is one of those cases where what one person does can make a difference.
Okay, so let's talk about what makes a pollinator garden.
From the start, it seems simple.
Yeah.
But I bet there's a little bit to it.
Yeah, well, Xerces has done a lot of research, and you can apply it, and you can do the best for animals.
Yeah.
So first of all, spring through fall, you need to have flowers that bloom in spring and fall. Just like I showed you that little cuckoo bee who flies in the early spring.
Yep.
There are bees who fly for 2 weeks in the fall, too. So if they don't have flowers that bloom in the fall, they're in trouble too.
Right.
So you need flowers that bloom early spring to late fall.
Now see,
That's
I had always assumed that the bees that we see in the garden are bees that hang around all summer long. They pollinate spring flowers, summer flowers, fall flowers, and that was their entire life cycle.
Yeah.
But you're telling me something different now.
Yeah, they will pollinate certain things, and some bees are specialist bees. They'll only go to some kinds of flowers.
Wow.
So you know, there are so many different kinds of bees, native bees in Connecticut, 340.
Right.
And some of them are early spring, some are late spring, some are, you know, bumblebees are all through.
Nancy, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea they were so specialized.
Yeah. So another thing that you need to have is a variety of shapes, because that's one of the reasons I showed those different shapes of bees in the beginning.
Right.
Because there are a lot of different kinds of bees with different size mouth parts that can get to different kinds of flowers, and that will get to different kinds of flowers. So you need a variety of flower shapes too.
Now that's totally new.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is you need to have 3 different plants of the same species, at least. You can't, in other words, if you have a 10 by 10 foot space, you can't have one plant of, you know,
aster,
15 different things.
Right.
Because bees have what is called flower constancy. And what that means is that once a bee starts a nest, it needs that same pollen from that same plant to complete the nest. So if you have only one plant of that type, the bee can't complete the nest.
I don't understand. Why do this? How does the flower help with the nest?
Well, each flower has a particular kind of pollen. And the bees will, well, some bees are specialist bees. About 30% of our bees are specialist bees. They'll only go to certain kinds of flowers, and they want only that pollen. Other bees are generalist bees. They'll go anywhere. But once they start a nest, they want to go back to that same plant to get that same kind of pollen. So you need to have, you know, it's better to have 3 plants of 9 different things than 18 different individual plants.
Of the same,
you know, of different species.
Oh, okay.
So you need to have a clump of, you know, plant 3 plants of asters, and then 3 plants of goldenrod, and then 3 plants of something else too.
Oh, I see.
At least 3.
Yeah, yeah.
Because once they start the nest, they need more pollen.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, yeah, and flowers for specialist bees, that's another thing. If you want to help all bees, you need to have flowers for the specialists. The generalists will go to anyone, but the specialists need a particular kind of flower.
Could you name a specialist bee and what flower that goes to?
My goodness, I can't.
Did I surprise you with that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's a lot of specialist bees that go to goldenrod, but I couldn't name the kind of bee.
No, that's fine.
Goldenrod is one of the keystone plants.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to talk about keystone flowers next.
Let's go.
So if you can picture a Roman arch, you know, because like that, it has a keystone.
Right, right.
When you take the keystone out, the arch collapses.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so if you have keystone flowers in your garden, your ecosystem will function well.
Yeah.
If you don't have any keystone flowers, your ecosystem will collapse.
Oh boy.
Okay, so there are keystone trees too. There's 3, and there's keystone flowers. There's 3, and the most valuable flower is goldenrod.
Is that right?
Yeah, and people give goldenrod a bad name because they say,
tell you that, yeah.
I know, because they say, oh, that's an aggressive plant, it'll take over. But you know, and I didn't know this, but there's a large variety of different kinds of goldenrod that are native to Connecticut.
Yeah, yeah.
And Canada goldenrod will take over a field, but if you have a garden, any of the others are very well behaved. And they support their host plant for, I think it's 115 different Lepidoptera.
Wow.
Now, Lepidoptera is moths and butterflies.
Right, right, right.
They lay the eggs. They lay their eggs on the leaves.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so goldenrods are big. Asters are big, and sunflowers.
Oh.
Those are the 3.
Now, I have to share with you, I have a garden at home. I call it the quiet corner, and I had asters in it, but then the milkweed moved in and kind of obliterated them. But up until then, the monarchs would come and hang out at the asters. as if they were filling up for their big trip
Yes,
home.
they're going to
It was
Mexico.
actually quite something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that too. And they're on their way to Mexico, and they need nectar at that point. They don't need the milkweed anymore.
No, no, no.
Because they've, yeah.
That process is
Yep.
done.
So to make a pollinator garden, those are the things you need to think about for native flowers.
Right.
Another thing you need to think about is nesting sites.
Right.
So if they can't nest, they're not going to be any next year.
Right.
So there's another slide, actually. Yeah.
Is that it?
Yep.
Oh,
So
what are we looking at here?
70% of our native bees nest in the ground. This is a picture of a ground that you might not think anything about, but these are native bees nesting in the ground.
Yeah.
And there's another slide, the next slide, about just showing you that you don't need much ground.
Oh.
That's a nest.
Where the sand is?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yep. It looks like an anthill.
Yeah, yeah, it
Yeah,
does.
they do. They look like an anthill, but so you need bare soil
Right.
to provide a place for them to have their whole life cycle.
I got to share something with you. When we had a house in Newington, and you know, I don't really agree with the super cared for lawn tech mentality.
Yeah.
And in the backyard, there were these holes, big, maybe a half-inch across hole. And I waited there, and I waited for the thing to come out, and it was an enormous wasp. It had to be,
yeah.
It had to be like 2 or 3 inches long.
Wow.
And it didn't do anything. It flew right by me. It didn't attack me or anything.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So and there was a couple of them in my backyard, and so
Yeah.
they definitely did a nest in the ground.
Yeah, yeah. And can we see the next slide? So 70% nest in the ground and 30% nest in stems.
Wow.
So if you see, in the winter, somebody has left up their stems in their garden.
Yeah.
Now I look at that and I think, oh, there could be bees overwintering there.
Yes, yes.
And in early spring, when people think they should be fixing up their garden and getting rid of all that stuff,
Right.
I think it's good if you don't do that, because I think that's beautiful the way it is, you know, and wait for the bees to leave.
That's an uphill challenge right there.
Yeah, yeah. So that's another thing. It's
Now, what is this in the bottom picture?
That is a little bee who has made its nest, laying eggs, bringing pollen back.
Wow.
Laying eggs on the pollen, and then they make a little bee bread type of thing to block it off, and then they bring pollen back to the next thing, and then lay an egg. Yeah, and it's, yep, that's a bee who's laying eggs inside that stem.
Busy getting it done there.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. So it's native flowers, it's nesting sites, and the third thing is host plants.
Right.
Milkweed, you mentioned, that's a host plant, but there are other things that are host plants too.
Yep.
So, and then the fourth thing, which is really the most important, is it needs to be pesticide free.
Absolutely.
Because if you have everything else that's great and you use pesticides, well, everything's going to die. So
I had a guest on a couple of shows ago, and I think it was something similar to this, and I mentioned to him that I have snakes in my quiet corner garden. And
predators.
I said, what?
Predators.
Yes, yes.
And so prey.
Well, yes. And so I mentioned to him that I think they're there because I don't use any of the 3 chemicals in my yard. And so whatever's growing there is growing au naturel. Yep. And I consider that as a kind of like a bellwether statement for me doing a good job without using pesticides.
Yeah, I also do that when I see a toad or something. I think to myself, that's good. He's a predator, that's good. If you have predators, they say it's a healthy ecosystem.
Right.
So that's good. And then the other thing for a pollinator garden is putting a sign up that tells people what you're doing.
I have.
And I have the next slide.
Okay, let's look at that. Oh, there we go.
So, yeah.
Now, do you have to qualify to get that, or can you just buy it
You can buy it.
Yeah.
Yep, you can buy it and you can put it in anywhere you want.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
There's other signs
That's a
too,
pretty
but
sign.
It is, yep.
Pretty sign.
So it talks about the pollinator pledge. And
Yep.
follow the 4 principles: grow pollinator-friendly flowers, provide nest and egg-laying sites,
Yeah.
avoid pesticides, and share the word. Yep.
All right. Very good. Very good. What's next?
Okay. Well, I thought I might talk a little bit about honeybees.
Oh, please do.
Just a little bit. You know, everybody talks about honeybees. When you see pictures of bees, it's always honeybees. But honeybees are a domesticated animal. They're farmed for their honey.
Right.
And their hives are rented out to agricultural fields.
I heard them described as livestock.
Yeah, they're livestock. That's what they are.
That's wild.
Yeah. And they say that for every hive, they need 5 acres of wildflowers around the hive in order to support the hive. And in that 5 acres, that's where they run into our native bees.
Right.
And because bees and hives, the honeybees are so close together, it's very easy for diseases to spread.
Oh.
And so when they go out and they interact with our native bees, they go to the same flowers. Our native bees that are closer, flying closer to hives, tend to have diseases.
Oh.
So honeybees are not endangered. People say, oh, save the bees. They don't need to be saved.
No, they
There's tons of honeybee hives all in the United States and all around the world. They're not endangered at all. Our local native bees are endangered.
Yes.
They're declining.
Right.
And probably all invertebrates are declining in this.
That's probably a safe bet.
Yeah, yeah. So that's just my little blurb about honeybees. In our agricultural fields, our native bees used to pollinate them.
Yeah.
But the way we farm now, we have a field could be 10 acres big.
Yeah.
And the native bees, they're not going to fly very far from their nest. So they're going to do the edges, but they're not going to get the middle.
Right, right.
You know? So
that's where the portable honeybee hive comes.
Right. The portable, you bring it to the middle of the field and the honeybees do their thing.
I have a story about honeybees. My friend had a beehive, and you know, she was all gung-ho, and the husband and wife were both gung-ho, and oh, this is great. And I sampled the honey, and it was absolutely delicious.
Yeah.
But then what people don't talk about is they can just abandon the hive, and they spend so much money to buy a queen, and the queen just decides to go away.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So after they lost about 2 or 3 hives, they said, "Forget it, we're not doing it anymore."
Where do they go? Out in the woods?
I guess the queen decides to go somewhere else, and off they go.
Okay. Well, I could talk about a couple of other things. Do you have anything else you'd like to ask me?
I want you to tell us about as much of the Xerces Society as we can, because I think most people have never heard of it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I really like about Xerces is they don't take any money from pesticide companies or fossil fuel industry.
Oh, wow. Excellent.
Because they feel that global warming is impacting invertebrates, and so they just don't want. And to me, that means that when they do their research, they can take the results and speak truth to power.
Right.
So that's kind of important and impressive.
I think that's an interesting saying. Speak truth to power. That's something they probably don't want to hear all the time, I would say.
And another thing I think just is worth mentioning is that we have to change our concept of what is beautiful.
Right.
You know, people think that if every blade of grass in their yard is the same width, that is beautiful.
Yes, yes.
You know, it might be beautiful to them,
right,
but it's a desert to wildlife.
It really is, yeah.
And, you know, so we need to be able to be a little messy.
Right.
And we need to let nature have a little share of the land that we have.
I have always wanted to do a show dedicated to the lawn. And I did some research, and it's like the amount of lawn space in America is like 4 or 5 states worth of lawn. And it's a monoculture basically, and there's just no food out there for anything but robins, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I actually have several gardens, and it's daunting, but it's very important.
Yeah, and leaf litter, that's another thing.
Yeah.
The Xerces has a saying, leave the leaves.
Yep.
And so, you know, that it looks a little messy. It might look a little messy, but you know what? That's where invertebrates are overwintering. And did you know, I didn't know this till we recently, the ambassadors, we can do certain presentations, and there are 3. So I've done the Bring Back the Pollinators, and I've done the one about monarch butterfly conservation. Yep. But we just got the firefly one.
Right.
So I haven't done that anywhere yet, but one of the things I learned is that firefly larvae, well, there's a lot of different kinds of fireflies, but some of the larvae of fireflies eat dead leaves. So if we rake our leaves into a pile and bag it up and let the town take it away, you know, that might be next year's fireflies.
Right.
We don't know. You know?
So I have what I call a shady quadrant in my yard, and there's just big trees all over the place, and I don't rake. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
Possibly.
That's nice.
Partly because my shoulders are not so good anymore, and partly because I leave the leaves. I'm all on board with that. And in the spring or in the summer, like now, you can't really tell that you didn't rake.
Yeah.
It all gets absorbed in.
Yeah. They break down, and it's like nature's recycling.
That's exactly what it is.
Recycling the nutrients. Yeah. So, you know, we need to rethink what's beautiful. Stems up in the winter and in the spring. Dead stems up, leaf litter, a little messy areas. If something falls down in the woods near your house, you know, leave it down.
Yeah.
Let an animal, a beetle, drill a hole in it. You know.
Yep.
And imperfect lawns, of course. So.
Well, you know what, and I don't think I've read this anywhere, but I just kind of came up with, if everybody took 10% of their lawn and turned it into a butterfly garden or a hummingbird garden, we'd probably be a little bit better off. And that's only 10%.
Yeah. We have land set aside in national parks and things, but, you know, we have so much, like you said, that's locked up in lawns and streets and parking lots, and we need to put it in our yards.
And let me just say, I just came up with 10%. I just thought it was a good place to start, and it's probably significant enough to make a difference. But you know, it could be 20%, it could be 15%, whatever. But I think if you just do that.
Yeah, and you know that little bee that I showed you in the first slide?
Yes, yes.
Well, little bees like that, they're not going to fly very far from their nest.
You wouldn't think so.
They're going to fly maybe 500 feet. Okay, maybe that's as far as they go.
Right, yeah.
And if there's not another bunch of flowers with other bees that they can mate with, you're not going to support that.
Yeah.
So what that tells me is these little, any little amount, you know, you said 10% of your yard or whatever, any little amount, even, you know, a 3x3 circle.
Right.
Any amount will attract bees, and it will give them the opportunity to move through the environment. Because if there's nothing there, it's like the pollinator pathway.
Right.
You need to have a pathway so that these animals can find mates.
Yeah.
Now a bumblebee might be able to fly a mile, but those little bees that are 5 millimeters long, you know, they're going to fly 500. That's two houses in my town.
Like 30 miles to them, you know.
Yeah.
So now we've talked a lot about native plants.
Yeah.
Where would we get native plants? Do we go to the big box stores? I'm not going to name them, but we know who they are.
Yeah.
Or do we go to Joe, nursery guy down the street? Or
Yeah. I go to native plant nurseries.
Oh, okay.
And there's two that I go to. I don't know if you want me to name their names.
You can, yeah.
Okay. In Northford, there's Nature Works.
Right.
That's pretty well known. And up in Woodbury, there's Earth Tones Native
That's
Plant
where
Nursery.
I go, yeah.
And I've found both of those places are wonderful, and
Yeah.
you can be sure. Oh, and the other place is the Connecticut River Conservation District has a plant sale, a native plant sale. You talked about it on
Yes,
one
they
of your
did,
shows.
yes. And they
Once a year.
they are supplied by Earth Tones.
Yeah, and I drive to, I drive to Chester Fairgrounds every spring to get something from there too, because they're nicely priced, and I know they're going to be eco-regional,
Yes, that's actually a new thing coming up.
I know. I'm just learning about that too.
Yeah. So the eco thing is that you grow plants from seeds harvested in your little microme, like your little portion of the county. So it's maybe a plant is adjusted to the Northwest Hills, and if it starts growing on the shoreline, it might have some challenges that it might not be able to face.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
So if you get plants grown in the shoreline communities, and you put them up, and you get the seeds going, they'll be very well accustomed to shoreline communities.
Yeah.
And that's a very new thing. I think that's about a year or two old.
You can buy plants, through the mail that are from Georgia that are, Monarda fistulosa. That's a great plant.
Yeah.
But, it comes from Georgia, and here, it's just not
It's not going to be 110 in Connecticut, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's not going to thrive. So I go local, and I try to, I always make sure that there's no neonics. Neonicotinoids, those are the kinds of pesticides that some growers put into the seeds, and they get into the plants so that no animal would eat them.
Right.
So that when you're looking at them in the store, they look beautiful.
Yeah.
But really, that poison is infused in their flowers, and their nectar, and their leaves, and everywhere. And
what are we doing to ourselves?
Yeah.
All right, so we got a couple of minutes left. Let's do a wrap-up sales pitch for the Xerces Society, shall we?
My goodness. Well, I don't know what to say to that. But I'm an ambassador. I can tell you about the ambassador program.
Excellent.
Okay.
Let's do that.
Okay, so, I retired in 2017, and I wanted to watch birds.
Yeah.
Then I wanted birds to nest in my yard.
Right.
That led me to native plants. That led me to the pollinator pathway. That led me to my land trust.
Yeah.
And then I ran into Xerces, and Xerces just pulled it all together for me.
Yes, they do.
And then, so I got on their mailing list, and I found out, they're having a course in how to be an ambassador. And I thought, well, that's like taking to the next level. So I applied. I filled out an application. I was interviewed for an hour.
Wow.
I was vetted. They had references, and I submitted a copy of myself doing a lecture.
Oh, wow.
And I was accepted, and I went through 8 hours of training. And
so it's very thorough.
Yeah, and at the end of it, they supply me with, oh my goodness, everything you could ever imagine to want to table at an event.
Right.
Or the information to give a presentation like at a local library or something like that.
Right.
I told you there's 3 presentations that we can do, and I've done 2 of them. But they give you this PowerPoint of like 80 slides, and you can take out and fix it to be the way you want to present whatever aspect of the pollinators you want.
Yeah.
Same thing with the monarchs.
Yep.
Same thing with fireflies. So pretty much everything Xerces does is top-notch. And the information that they have is all science-based.
Right.
And they want to protect habitats and invertebrates.
So if you're interested in starting a native garden, and you're interested in protecting habitats and all the little critters, the 340 pollinators that you may not always see, please go to the Xerces Society website. And you could easily get lost in all the information that they have there. If you have any question about how to do any planting or what's in your yard, you will find it there. Xercessociety.org?
Xerces.org.
Xerces.org.
Yep.
So no society on there.
Yeah, it's society when you're going to their podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Xerces.org.
Xerces.org. Just a wealth of information to help you get going on a pollinator-friendly garden.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think we did a good job, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. So this is Jim Therien signing off. Have a good night.